At last, Doctor.
Am I late for something?
I was beginning to fear you had lost yourself. Sit down.
With a life nearing 60 years, Doctor Who was bound to have a handful of stories that were in some way or another never broadcast on TV. The most well-known example of this was Shada. Production was halted mainly due to strikes across Britain, but many Doctor Who stories never even made it this far. A plethora of these stories have been released commercially through novelisations or even adapted for audio by Big Finish, in which many of the original cast members returned to play their respective roles. In this series, given people enjoy it, I'll be detailing the lost stories of Doctor Who, although future videos will instead go through any and all stories, not just those adapted for the first series of the Lost Stories, an adaptation of what was the originally planned Season 23, before being abandoned and replaced with the Trial of a Time Lord. When Doctor Who found itself in a hiatus in February 1985, a handful of completed scripts were already being prepared for the season next year. A season that would have retained the format of 45-minute episodes. With some stories still being outlined, they were all eventually withdrawn to make way for the Trial of a Time Lord when the series resumed in September 1986. When Big Finish made the decision to revive these lost stories, an idea that had been brewing in the mind of David Richardson ever since he began working there, they had to do a lot of digging. All known Season 23 scripts and story ideas were to be produced. However, this turned out to be easier said than done. Rights issues and writer availability made this concept essentially impossible, and so more flexibility was required. During research, Big Finish revealed many scripts and story ideas actually meant for the previous Season 22, and so David Richardson, the producer, decided to make a mostly new season, comprising of most of the stories known to have been destined for Season 23, and some meant for Season 22. All the stories were written in a new way that essentially linked them all together, with continuing narrative elements not present in the original scripts, a step further than the original goal of simply adapting the known stories for anthology releases. Big Finish's research seems to have revealed 32 individual stories at varying stages of development, with the potential to be in either Season 22 or 23. 9 titles submitted for Season 22 include Cat's Cradle, The First Sontarans, The Guardians of Prophecy, Leviathan, The Macros, Volvoc, The End of the Road, and 2 untitled stories, one written by Christopher Bidmead and another by Chris Boucher. The 6 titles initially planned for Season 23 were The Nightmare Fair, The Ultimate Evil, Mission to Magnus, Yellow Fever and How to Cure It, In the Hollows of Time, and The Children of January. However, Ian Levine claims with complete certainty that the finale was to be the Pip and Jane Baker script, Gallifrey, and that the "and how to cure it" tagline from Yellow Fever was nothing more than a joke from writer Bob Holmes. The 11 additional titles submitted for Season 23 were Dark Labyrinth, Doom Wraiths, Flipback, Iceberg, League of the Tancreds, Meltdown, Point of Entry, Space Sargasso, Valley of Shadows, and 2 untitled stories, one written by Bill Pritchard and another by Jonathan Wolfman. 5 titles that were candidates for the Trial of a Time Lord were Attack from the Mind, The Second Coming, Pinacotheca, End of Term, and Time Inc. Pinacotheca is more well known as its initial title, The Last Adventure. A combination of 7 stories from this list were chosen for varying reasons. Additionally, a story first submitted for Season 18 and many following seasons, called Song of the Space Whale, was also included in the series. The original lineup from these stories was as follows: The Nightmare Fair, Mission to Magnus, Leviathan, In the Hollows of Time, End of Term, Point of Entry, Song of the Space Whale, and The Children of January. However, The Children of January fell through due to the writers' commitments and was replaced by The Macros. 5 of the original writers returned to revise their own respective scripts, with Christopher Bidmead describing his revision as a top-to-bottom rewrite. The Nightmare Fair was adapted for audio by director John Ainsworth. Paul Finch approached Big Finish with a complete adapted script of Leviathan that his father Brian had written. Andy Lane adapted PJ Hammond's incomplete script for Paradise 5. And finally, Mark Platt turned Barbara Clegg's detailed story breakdown for Point of Entry into a complete script.
Oh, what a you.
Doesn't look so special to me, Doctor. Do we have to come all the way up this rusty old tower just to see that?
You can't come to Blackpool, Perry, and not go up Blackpool Tower?
If you say so.
The TARDIS has been drawn to Blackpool in the year 1985, where the Doctor intends to investigate a dangerous space-time vortex, while enjoying some local attractions along the way. But an old enemy is watching from his base deep within the amusement park, a timeless being who craves revenge. With the story having been commissioned on the 17th of November 1984, The Nightmare Fair was one of the 3 stories in the middle of being scripted when the plug was pulled on the original season 23, having already been distributed to all cast and crew. Former series producer Graham Williams was to have written the season opener, featuring the return of the first Doctor antagonist, the Celestial Toymaker, with the working title, Arcade. John Nathan-Turner planned to have Matthew Robinson direct the adventure and Michael Gough to return, the original Toymaker, 20 years after his introduction. Nathan-Turner had the idea of using Blackpool as the setting of a Doctor Who story in 1984 when Colin Baker was invited to Blackpool Pleasure Beach to open the ride Space Mountain. Studio days were booked for this story to be recorded, starting on the 20th of May 1985. Location filming was also planned to take place at Blackpool. Before the hiatus was announced, The Nightmare Fair Part 1 was to have been transmitted on the 4th of January 1986, with Part 2 a week later on the 11th. Panopticon 6, towards the end of July 1985, saw Williams finally reveal that The Nightmare Fair had been placed on hold, in purgatory, for the foreseeable future. The original ending of the season 22 finale Revelation of the Daleks had the Doctor telling Perry he was going to take her to Blackpool. However, the decision was made to freeze frame the Doctor before he says this. This story, as well as the following story Mission to Magnus, had previously been released as Target novels in 1989, under the Missing Episodes banner. The other story in the Target range, The Ultimate Evil, was not adapted for audio. The Ultimate Evil was later adapted in the 5th series. While the novelisation does not take its lead from the original ending of Revelation, the audio adaptation from John Ainsworth meets the Doctor and Perry already in Blackpool, presumably on the trip he promised. Additionally, back in the distant year of 2003, a fan production of The Nightmare Fair by Argolis Productions was created for charity, although details are scarce. In early March 2009, Big Finish announced that the role of the Toymaker was to be played by David Bailey, who had previously played Dask in the 1977 story The Robots of Death, a contributing factor to his casting. Michael Gough had since retired from acting.
Where are we?
Let's see.
Scanner's not working.
Wait. There. 7 small moons and twin worlds. One blue and the other orange.
The Doctor and Perry face enemies at every turn on the planet Magnus. There's the Time Lord bully Anzor, the matriarchal ruler Rana Zandusha, the slug-like Syl, still bitter from his defeat on the planet Varos, and deep within the planet, there's something else. Another old enemy of the Doctor. Mission to Magnus Part 1 was intended to be transmitted on the 1st of February 1986, with Part 2 a week later on the 8th. John Nathan-Turner planned to have Ron Jones direct the adventure, although Graham Harper was initially in the running, eventually planning to direct Yellow Fever instead. Mission to Magnus was the least complete of the 3 in production scripts. Because of this, it required much more work in order to adapt it for the novelisation in 1990. Philip Martin, the writer, would recall that everything up to the point where Anzor vanishes from the story was more or less scripted, and the material that followed had only been storylined at the point the season was rejected. One thing that he took advantage of in the process of finishing the story in novel form was to include a reference to the mentor Kiv, a character seen in the story's eventual replacement, Mind Warp. The audio story saw Nabil Shaban return as Syl for the first time in a Big Finish audio production. The audio also sees very minimal alterations to both the original script and novelisation, with one of the changes simply being the delaying of the reveal of the Ice Warrior's involvement. The story also features many pieces of dialogue that some may consider dated and stereotypical in regards to women. Unlike the majority of modern Big Finish works, many of these lines were kept in, presumably as a way to preserve that era of television. Tina Jones, who voiced Soma and Ulema, notes that because of the context of the piece, it's making the men look foolish, and that these lines were used as more of a humorous capture of the outdated views of that time. However, Jones, as well as even Nicola Bryant playing Perry, noted that it can cause offence if not looked through an 80s lens, but additionally, it's generally considered that no malice was intended in the first place.
Is that a castle? Over the treetops there?
Yeah, looks like it.
What do you think that means?
It means we've materialised near a castle. Look, I'm a little preoccupied here.
No one lives to old age in the village. When their time has come, they are taken and never seen again. That is the way. and should anyone try to break with the established order of things, then the fury of Hearn the Hunter is unleashed. When the TARDIS materialises near a castle in this medieval society, the Doctor and Perry befriend Girth, who is attempting to flee his fate, and Hearn is closing in. Leviathan is the first lost story in this series to actually have been written for season 22. The scripts for the two-part story were commissioned as Leviathan on the 4th of August 1983. It was dropped at the last minute, having rehearsal scripts set up. The reasons for its cancellation are unknown, although David Richardson has suggested it's most likely due to budgetary reasons. Richardson and Colin Baker both praised this story, with Baker noting that it's able to bridge the gap between modern and classic Who. The script for this serial was sent in after Paul Finch read about the Lost Stories series in Doctor Who magazine. Recording for the series was already nearing completion, but after reading Paul's script that he had completed, Richardson arranged to extend the originally planned 7 stories. There were many concerns among the crew of the large visual nature and plentiful short scenes included in the original script, and so revisions had to be made. Fortunately, Paul saw an opportunity of the unlimited potential of audio and the ability to go all out with many scenes that would have been impossible during the 80s. Paul has since written a prequel to Leviathan for the Companion Chronicles range, featuring the third Doctor, titled The Sentinels of the New Dawn.
A nice, quiet English countryside holiday in the sleepy old village of Hollowdean.
Did I say that? I don't remember.
It was only 2 days ago, Doctor. Oh, never mind. It's all over now.
But I do mind. And it's not all over.
The Doctor and Perry have been on holiday, visiting old friend Reverend Foxwell in the sleepy English village of Hollowdean. But why are their memories so hazy? Piecing together events, they recall a mysterious chauffeur who is not what he seems, and Foxwell's experiments that could alter the nature of reality. Huge sand creatures have been sighted on the dunes, and many of the locals are devoted to a leader known as Professor Stream. The Hollows of Time was commissioned as a 2-part story from Christopher Bidmead on the 21st of November 1984. Interestingly, following the cancellation, Bidmead, along with Robert Holmes and Michael Feeney Callan, were asked to continue with the stories, but to return to the 25-minute format. John Nathan-Turner planned to have Matthew Robinson direct the adventure, which would have been his second story of season 23, although Robinson may have ended up pulling out of directing both this and The Nightmare Fair. The original version of the script would have revealed Professor Stream to be the Master, as played by Anthony Ainley. Unfortunately, the rights to the character couldn't be obtained for the Big Finish adaptation, and Ainley passed away in 2004. In this version of the story, the Professor Stream character is retained, but his identity is left ambiguous. David Garfield played this role in the audio production, portraying the character with a voice similar to Anthony Ainley's. In narrative, this is further explained as the Doctor and Perry suffering from slight amnesia after this adventure, creating the possibility that Stream is the Master, but they just don't remember it. David Richardson noted that in pre-production, the script went through multiple drafts, initially coming in at 3 times over the common length of Big Finish stories. Together, David Richardson, director John Ainsworth, and Chris Bidmead removed or altered multiple unnecessary or over-descriptive scenes, while introducing a small handful of sequences that worked in the favour of the audio form. This story marks the first appearance of the Tractators in an audio story, as well as their first appearance in Doctor Who in any medium since their introduction in Frontios 26 years earlier.
And here we are, the planet Targos Delta, jewel of the Arbogast system, high spot of the Noctis cluster.
It stinks.
That's the smell of progress, my dear. And complex hydrocarbons.
The Doctor and Perry visit the leisure planet Targos Delta to check in on an old friend, Professor Albrecht Thompson, only to discover that he's vanished. He was last sighted taking a shuttle to the holiday resort of Paradise 5, then never seen again. They attempt to investigate. Perry goes undercover, while the Doctor hides in the shadows. But Paradise holds a terrible secret beneath the white marble and golden trimmings. The mute cherubs have a story to tell, and the Elohim are coming. Paradise 5 was originally intended to be parts 9 to 12 of The Trial of a Time Lord, and would have featured the introduction of Mel. According to the writer PJ Hammond, script editor Eric Saward enjoyed the story, although producer John Nathan-Turner disagreed. Ultimately, it was rejected just after the first episode had been drafted, and Terror of the Vervoids was used in this slot instead. In the audio adaptation, Mel is replaced with Perry. The story is backdated to before the events of the trial of a Time Lord, as well as the trial scenes removed, and a whole new introductory segment is included. Not initially considered for the Lost Stories, Gary Russell suggested it to David Richardson, who went on to contact PJ Hammond, who allowed it to be adapted by Andy Lane as his schedule meant he was not able to do it himself. Hammond also wrote 2 episodes of Torchwood, Small Worlds and From Out of the Rain. Both of these episodes I am not a fan of. At all. Alex McQueen, who voices Gabriel, would later play the Master in audio adventures featuring the 6th, 7th and 8th Doctors.
London, England?
1590 local time or thereabouts. The Elizabethan age. Now why drag the TARDIS here?
Playwright Kit Marlowe is attempting to write Dr. Faustus when a darkness descends on his life, in the cadaverous form of a Spaniard called Valets. The monstrosity is in search of a stone blade that was brought from South America. After a near-disastrous collision with an asteroid in space, the TARDIS makes an emergency landing in Elizabethan England. These 2 events are connected. The Omnim are ready, and the point of entry approaches. Written by Barbara Clegg, writer of Enlightenment, this scary story never made it past the submission stage of the original Season 23, and thus, details are scarce. Clegg wasn't interested in writing the adaptation herself, however allowed Mark Platt to take the helm, using a storyline that only spanned about a page and a half, although Platt noted that there was a lot to go on.
Actually, dark matter is really just a way of describing the unknown.
You mean like the way they used to write on maps? Terra incognita?
Yes. Or here be dragons. Or here be space whales.
Deep space in the distant future, and Captain Grieg and his crew are hunting mile-long space whales on a vast harvesting ship. By pure accident, they also capture the TARDIS. The Doctor and Perry must use all their wits to survive. But what is the creature running loose in the ship's bowels, and can the Doctor save Megaptera before its song is extinguished forever? Space Whale was originally pitched by Pat Mills and his writing partner John Wagner in 1980 as a 4th Doctor adventure. When the production office noted their interest in the story, Wagner left the project after a draft of episode 1, mostly due to his negative view of the BBC. The script was commissioned as a 4-part 5th Doctor story for a scene breakdown on the 7th or 9th of September 1981, and full scripts on the 2nd of December. The new drafts reduced the humour and was renamed Song of the Space Whale, as well as being planned as the 3rd serial in season 20 and intended to introduce new companion Vizsla Turlough. Mills's disagreements with Saward led to the script being delayed until it was too late to serve as Turlough's introductory story, being replaced with Mordrin Undead. The script was then considered for season 21 and later season 22, the latter of which saw it being replaced by Vengeance on Varos. By this point, the script had been revised as 2 45-minute episodes, but although it was still listed in July 1985 as an ongoing script, by November, producer John Nathan-Turner confirmed at a convention that the script had been dropped, as it never quite lived up to their expectations. According to another BBC script editor, the reason for the constant delays and rewrites was because the story had been commissioned by Saward's predecessor, Christopher Bidmead, and so Saward wasn't interested in a story that he hadn't chosen. After many years of rest for the story, while recording for the 8th Doctor Adventures story Scapegoat, David Richardson queried Pat Mills as to whether he still had any old scripts for the Space Whale story. Fortunately for Richardson, he did, mostly down to the fact of there being so many different drafts and alterations since the original. Even further in Richardson and director John Ainsworth's favour, the script that was delivered had very few and minor rewrites necessary, likely due to Mills's previous experience with Big Finish.
Does it smell like Baltimore?
Certainly not.
And where are we supposed to be going?
Baltimore?
To do what?
Well,
To let my family know I'm okay after I suddenly disappeared on them in Lanzarote.
Yes, that's right.
So, would you say we're in Baltimore?
No.
The TARDIS materialises on the USS Eldridge after the Philadelphia experiment has gone disastrously wrong. Most of the crew are dead, the ship is disintegrating, and the Doctor soon realises that the problem comes from another dimension. Ingrid Pitt and her husband Tony Rudlin were asked to write this story while she was working on Warriors of the Deep, playing Dr. Solo. The Macra Men was originally conceived as a 4-part 5th Doctor story, although was quickly revised as a 2-part 6th Doctor tale, similar to another dropped story by Peter Ling and Hazel Adair called Hex. A script for the first episode only was commissioned on the 19th of August 1984 for the 45-minute format. However, despite several meetings with scriptwriter Eric Saward carrying out multiple revisions, the story, now known as The Macros, never progressed past the drafting process. The timing wasn't perfect when came time for the Big Finish adaptation. Pitt and Rudlin's computer had recently crashed, losing, among many things, the first episode, a draft for a second episode, as well as the complete storyline, forcing the two to recreate the entire script from memory. Fortunately, however, this did mean that even in the drafting stage, the script was written for audio, despite having a relatively large number of characters. The entire box set began recording on the 18th of February 2009 with Mission to Magnus, each story requiring 2 recording sessions at the Moat Studios in London. The final recording session was on the 5th of November for Point of Entry. David Richardson briefed all the composers, including Jamie Robertson, to give the Lost Stories season an original but classic 80s retro feel. Paradise 5 and the Song of Megaptera are the only 4-parters in this series, apparently to reflect the format of their origins. The characterizations of Perry and the Sixth Doctor are closer to the season 22 versions of the characters than typical for the main Big Finish Doctor Who range. However, David Richardson and John Ainsworth note that they wanted to make the Sixth Doctor a warmer character and Perry a more rounded character, similar to their portrayals in previous Big Finish audios. David Richardson goes on to describe Perry as more reactive than in normal Big Finish stories, especially as the Lost Stories progress. Are you happy with how Big Finish went about adapting the Lost season of Doctor Who? And which unmade stories would you like to see come back to life? Let me know in the comments, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you next time.